I was just a child during the civil rights movement, and growing up in New York City meant that I did not have the same experience of Jim Crow laws as my people in the South experienced. Even so, I recall some of the mood at school after the assassination of Dr. King and certainly experienced my share of racism and racialized interactions over the years. What I came to appreciate is how Christian faith was integral to the struggle for African American civil rights. I ministered in Washington, D.C. for about 18 years and recall the construction and opening of the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. If you visit that memorial, you would not be able to miss the impressive statue of the civil rights leader carved in the Stone of Hope and prominently displayed as the focal point of the exhibit. Adjacent to the statue is a wall engraved with quotations related to peace, justice, and love from Dr. King's years of public ministry. One of the quotations is part of an oracle from the prophet Amos. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. That's Amos 5:24. It's not surprising that a Baptist preacher would quote the Bible. Yet the Bible took on special significance for many involved in the civil rights movement. It informed their sense of justice, not only within the confines of a local religious gathering, but throughout society. Many of the active participants in the civil rights movement were people who professed and demonstrated faith in God. For example, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, is an organization that emerged from the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955 to 56, and whose name communicates explicit dependence upon teachings in the Bible that undergird Christian faith. There were many other clergymen along with Dr. King who relied upon the Bible to guide their involvement in the movement. Among the most well-known are Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, Reverend Vernon Johns. He was Dr. King's predecessor at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Reverend Ralph David Abernathy, Reverend Wyatt T. Walker, and Reverend Jesse Jackson. Despite the movement's male-dominated leadership, it depended heavily upon church-going women. Some luminaries include Coretta Scott King, Diane Nash, who was raised Catholic and became a staunch advocate of nonviolence, and Rosa Parks, a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, who was active in the NAACP prior to her refusal to move to the back of the bus.
Hey, it's Scott here. Thanks for watching this Theology Lab video. If you're enjoying it, you can subscribe to the channel below and you'll get more Theology Lab videos as soon as they're released.
There were non-African Americans attracted to the movement, including many Jewish people who were also motivated by their understanding of the Bible. What is telling and difficult for some people to grasp in our time is how reluctant many white Christians were to embrace the work of Dr. King and others in the movement. Now, in our time, we celebrate Dr. King with a few benign quotations, but he was a staunch opponent of America's tendency to exploit and America's tendency to fixate on violence. Many Christians did not like Dr. King. He was feared by politicians and surveilled by the FBI. Many of you probably know that Dr. King's famous letter from a Birmingham jail was written as a response to white clergy who tried to dissuade the activism of King, even referring to members of the movement not from Birmingham as outside agitators. History has shown how so much of Dr. King's writing, even in that letter, is relevant for today. There are many quotable sections of that letter, but right now I draw attention to one part that might haunt Christians who think that they are allies with people of color in the fight for racial justice. Dr. King writes, "I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate. who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute understanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. Those are indeed tough words for some people who act as if disrupting the status quo is too jarring for our society. Dr. King mentions the paternalism of the so-called white moderate, and to a degree, that reality is still present. In my decades of ministry, I've met white Christians who certainly do not want to be associated with the ugliest racist groups, but act as if they know what is best for marginalized people. There's a tendency on the part of even well-meaning white Christians to talk more than listen, to dismiss voices that might sound too angry to them, or to explain away racist actions on the part of people they know. I've plenty of my own stories of some white Christians prepared to inform me of what it means to be Black in America. But I don't want to make my brief talk here solely about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and certainly not about me. I want to focus on the larger point that many African American Christians read the Bible through the lens of God's liberation, not only in the civil rights era, but even when under the yoke of slavery. The God who delivered Israel out of bondage, the God who saved Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from unjust government persecution and likewise did for Daniel, the God whose only begotten Son laid aside privilege and died as an enemy of the state but rose in power and glory, that God is the God that African Americans came to understand as being on their side and not like the God of the enslavers. In fact, as some scholars have pointed out, African American believers, although humiliated by injustice, demonstrate the nature of the suffering servant who is Jesus Christ more accurately than those who practice the faith of the enslavers. The model for Christian faith comes not from the powerful clamoring for attention, success, and notoriety, but from the humble, marginalized, faithful, who stand against injustice, not with the carnal weapons of the world, but with tenacious faith. The late activist, Representative John Lewis, congressman from Georgia, wrote a memoir of the civil rights movement entitled Walking with the Wind. In a chapter that focuses on the escalation of public protests during the 60s, Lewis discusses Birmingham, Alabama, and he writes, while King was in jail, Reverend James Bevel was busy organizing and training a huge army of Birmingham's children. He went into local Black schools and churches to teach hundreds of teenagers the techniques of nonviolence. Notice that phrase, while King was in jail. It stands out to me. The most famous icon of the civil rights movement is Dr. King, but there was a time when Dr. King was not out on the street, but in a jail cell, and the movement did not stop. Lewis writes that he and other leaders were encouraging people all along to do what they knew to be right, even if the leaders of the movement were not present. Lewis also wrote this, you don't have to wait until Roy Wilkins comes to Jackson. You don't have to wait until Martin Luther King comes to Macomb. You can do it yourself. There is no more powerful force than you. There is no leader as powerful as you if you pull together. That sentiment is an echo of some of Paul's teaching to the church in Philippi back in the first century. The civil rights movement did not stop when Dr. King was in jail because people had learned from him and others. In a similar way, Paul admonishes the church in Philippi while he was in prison. What Paul says in Philippians reminds me of what happened in Birmingham. Paul is confident that even though he is not present with his beloved congregation, God is still at work among them. God will complete the good efforts that already began. God will operate through people who are willing to work together, pray together, and love each other. The civil rights movement reflects biblical teaching from Exodus, the prophets, New Testament letters like Philippians, and many other passages in Scripture. The word justice can be intimidating and infuriating for people in power. But for the people of God, justice is part of our mandate. We are the people who strive for justice to thunder down like a waterfall.